the Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Emma, here with one of my favorite art historians from England, Dr. Peter Stiffell. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Hello, Ebba. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And back
Great,
again,
great.
everyone.
I can't wait to address this topic with you, Peter. I've been wanting to do it for a long, long time, and it's just that I think there's so much to know about this artist that we're going to talk about, but not just the artist, but the people he painted, right? Because you know so much about a certain someone that he painted. And this artist is Anthonis Mor, who painted famously Mary the First of England, a portrait that has, well, we'll talk about it, several versions, but the most famous one is in the Prado Museum in Madrid, right, Peter?
It certainly is, Emma. You've seen it more. Well, I've never seen it, so I'm very jealous.
That
You
is the
know,
thing, Peter. Why haven't you seen this portrait?
yeah, I ask myself that question every day.
Yes,
But
we have to get you out there to Madrid, and you have to meet her in the flesh.
oh, don't know because I might have to be checked walking out.
Well, and then the thing is, it's not just Mary in there by Anthonis Mor. There's so many other portraits in there by Anthonis Mor. Some of them that
Mm.
resemble the portrait of Mary, but for example, there's a portrait of a woman with a little dog. She's also sitting like Mary is, but she's an
Mm.
identified woman. So there's a lot to talk about of Anthonis Mor and the Prado Museum. But before that, let's talk a little bit about Anthonis Mor and where he's from and how he comes into your favorite queen's life, right? Could you tell us a bit about this famous artist?
Yes, well, where do we start with more? I mean, the fact is, I mean, it's one of these weird things. He wasn't really liked. He was quite an austere character. As with most of these artists, I don't think they ever really. I mean, they always knew they were very talented people, but I don't think he really ever appreciated it himself.
Hmm.
Um, from what I gather from him, I mean, I may be misinterpreting, but I mean, we can see how talented he is. But I think he was quite a what's the word? He was quite an angry person.
Oh,
From
he
what we from
was.
what we know. The famous art historian Cohen von Monder
Mm-hmm.
discusses how you know when Moore dies, his family don't want anything to do with him.
Oh,
Now,
really?
and yeah, his children. I mean, he's obviously married. He has children, but you wonder, well, what's this? I mean, there's a story about Moore, which needs to be written. Joanna Woodall did a wonderful biography on him. So if anyone is ever interested in Moore, please look at Joanna's work because it's absolutely phenomenal. Um, but yeah, I mean, Moore's it. He's an interesting person. He rises up through the ranks. Obviously, I know more for as Mary's, artist who painted Mary, because he came into London. He came into London in December. Well, he was ordered into London in December 1554.
Just to
Whether or
just
not,
to Peter, just to clarify, Mo is 3 years younger than Mary, so he was
yeah,
born.
he's around Mary's age.
He's around
Um,
Mary's age. He was born well, a bit older than Mary, a bit younger than Mary actually. He was born in 1519 in Utrecht,
mm,
so he's a bit younger than her, right?
yeah, no, exactly.
But they're
Um,
almost the same age. So I mean, by the
yeah,
time
I
they
mean,
met,
exactly. I mean, they're kinsmen, really. They're born in the around, like you said, around the same time. Um, you know, Moore's had his experience in Madrid. He knows the royal circles. Um,
certainly he's gone to
yeah,
Portugal too, and he's painted the
I
royal
was going to
family there.
say, I
So
mean, you'll be
Mary's cousins, yeah.
exactly. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think wasn't Charles very interested in him before Philip became, or was it more Philip that was Moore's? I mean, I know Philip obviously was his patron,
Hmm.
but was Charles? It was as well interested in him. So,
Yes, I think there was a
Moore
lot of
knows how
people.
to get
Yeah,
around.
yeah, there was a lot of people interested in Anthonis More in the royal family in Spain. Not only Charles V, but also Mary of Hungary. Mary of
Mm,
Hungary was the one to send him to Portugal to paint Mary Tudor's relatives in Portugal,
mm,
where they first saw how capable he was of rendering very good portraits that have a high level of verisimilitude, but at the same time, they are very intense. I think he's one of the best at capturing that personality in an expression, in an especially in the eyes. It was
Oh, definitely. I
seeing,
mean,
yeah,
it's so lifelike, isn't it? You know, if you compare Mary's portrait with, I mean, her father and her siblings, it's, I mean, it's complete. You know, it's like she's walking, kind of walking right in front of you, isn't it? It's so lifelike,
it
and I think
is.
people were scared of it. We know contemporaries were shocked at how how lifelike it was. Um,
It
yeah,
is
so
very lifelike. It is.
it's very
That's why
lifelike.
I've stood in front of Mary for such a long time at the Prado. I think people think
Mm,
I'm that weird lady that just stands in front of Mary Tudor's portrait, but the truth is, every time I stand in front, I can see her. I don't know how to
mm,
explain this feeling of
yeah.
like she's there for me, you know?
Yeah,
She's there
no,
present.
I'm the same. You know, whenever I see the Euro portrait or the Master John one, I'm that weird person who stands around there for about an hour. Just
We'll
yeah,
be the
so
two weird people standing at
yeah,
the Prado Museum next time. So watch
oh
out if you
definitely,
see us, you come and say hi. And don't
please
think we're
do.
weird. We're just, studying this portrait because it's got so many levels too, you know? It's a very
Oh, it's so
complex.
interesting. Yeah, so in terms of Moore's actual birth date, we don't actually know when he
Oh,
was born. Yeah, I mean, I've just been looking up his dates just to confirm. Yeah, so we don't actually know when he was really born. We know it's around 1516 to 21. So,
oh,
you know,
okay.
it's that 5 year different, 5 year gap. Um,
We don't know
but
yet.
and we don't
That
know yet exactly,
somebody has
any birth
to
certificates or any other
Well,
documents that.
sometimes even later in life, a painter can certify
Mm,
how old he is when he's, signing something. So you never
mm.
know. And he was all over the place. So you never
Yeah, I
know
mean,
when a document can just come up and have his age, for example, right?
exactly. He was Netherlandish, so he wasn't really Spanish. Don't tell the Spaniards that. um, but yeah,
He did work for the Spanish monarchs, for
he did. Yes,
Charles, for
Mayor of
Philip.
Hungary, and
But
you
listen to
know,
this. He became the king's painter, so Philip's painter, when Philip was king of England, not king of Spain,
mm,
right?
exactly. It was issued in December 1554.
So he was Mary's painter too, or just Philip's?
Well, this is the thing. Was he appointed painter before he painted Mary, or
Hmm.
after he painted Mary? You know, was it was this sort of the test? Can you paint my wife? If you do a good job, you've got the job.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'd wish I'd known. I really do.
Well, the
Because
reality is that they loved the portrait because there was copies made right away. The
exactly,
Queen sent those
he loved it.
copies
He
to
absolutely loved the portrait according to
yes.
contemporary accounts.
Yes, I would love it if Anthonis Mor rendered a portrait of me like that, like Mary, because not only she looks like she's very lifelike, but you she captures you because you are like, oh, this one is in charge.
Mm,
Other portraits of women are like, oh, she's beautiful. Oh, she's getting married. This one is like, okay, she's in charge. You just know Mary's in charge.
yeah,
So, and then, the subtle symbolism that is not so subtle in something like the rose that she's holding in her hand, right? Which in each version, Peter, can you talk about that? It's somewhat different.
yes, it's somewhat different. Now, I mean, this may just be due to survival, um, or just the bad quality images
So
that
we
are out
have
there.
three versions of the portrait
So
that we
there's
know.
yes, so there's three confirmed survivals. Obviously, the
Okay.
one at the Prado, which was
Uh-huh.
Charles V's. We then had one who was Mary's.
Mm-hmm.
That's now in Boston at the Isabella and Stewart Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have one. Now, let me just confirm that this is the correct one because I see so many of them. I always get confused. But the third one is at the Marquess of Northampton's collection
Mm-hmm.
in England. Now,
Have you seen this one live?
I've sadly not seen this one live because the family is quite private,
Mm-hmm.
which is quite frustrating. I have
Please,
tried to ask my
if
contact.
you listen to this podcast, we would love to come and see your portrait to
Oh,
be able
please,
to.
I really would, because your portrait's really fascinating.
Yes, I'll come with Dr. Peter, please, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
please. Yeah.
So please
So
tell
what?
us what the differences are, in specifically if you could start with a rose and then build up to other
Yeah,
differences.
exactly. So, I mean, the most visible difference is the rose. Um, Moor's original, which is in the Prado. Um, you know, it's got the leaves on. I think there's actually a fawn on it, if I'm not mistaken. But it's obviously it's more lifelike. There's been more attention paid to the rose. And it's red. Lancaster rose.
Hmm.
Um, the copies are more a pinkish color. Now that might just be the you know different type of paint, but the leaves have been removed, the thorn's been removed. So it's you do start to question, well, why is Moore's workshop done that? I mean, it may
Hmm.
be Moore himself. It's very difficult to tell without looking at it, physically.
Right.
So that's also the main difference with the rose as such. I mean, there's always been debate. Is it a rose? Is it a carnation? Because obviously, depending on what the flower is, it will mean something different. The rose is all about legitimacy, dynasty. Um, you know,
But
have a, you know,
but the pink color is different to the red color, right? So,
exactly. Yeah.
well,
So
yes, we know that,
there's
but
a slight difference.
the symbolism.
Again.
A few years back, I published an article about the galleries of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, where I
Mm,
argued that Mary's version could probably be hanging with the version of Raphael's portrait of Julius II that
yeah.
is in the National Gallery in London. If this would be the case, the pink was a color to signify the sacrifice of Christ, right?
Hmm.
So
Exactly.
maybe in Mary's version, she wanted the rose to symbolize that because it was going to hang with a different portrait than the one that was
Exactly.
going to be sent to Charles, that was
Mm,
probably going to be hung with a different set of portraits,
yeah.
right?
Exactly. Every portrait, they may have to share the same basic pattern, but there's slight differences in all of them, which obviously shows that the patron or whoever's wanting these portraits, they want something slightly different to fit their own taste.
So we could
Um,
say that Mary wanted her rose to be pink for some reason, right?
yes, exactly, because both Mary's version and the Marquess of Northampton's version is both, it's a pink rose.
So the one
I,
sent to Spain had the red rose, just to clarify. The two
yeah,
other versions of pink and arguably stayed in England until at some point that that portrait left the royal collection, obviously, right?
yeah, both portraits disappeared. I mean, we think the Marquess of Northampton's actually went to Spain at some point,
Yes, I know this
because
story
yeah, because Roy
because it
Strong
was a
talks about it.
gift. It was
Yes.
gifted back by Isabel II
Mm,
in the 19th century to the family. So yes, it wasn't.
yeah. So it makes you question then, you know,
Mary's
did
been
when
all over
did
the
it?
place.
Well, it had, and that might explain why it doesn't look as nice as the Prada and Mary's version, because it has been traveling a lot. When
Exactly.
did it go to Spain?
Well, the
You
thing
know,
about the one in the
did it go
Prado
to
has
Mayor of
been
Hungary?
it's been
You know,
so important since it was painted that it's been very
mm,
well kept in the royal collection throughout centuries. It was
mm.
hanging in different palaces, and it
Oh,
was a
exactly.
very important piece of the royal collection. Even Charles V took it to Yuste, where his final
Yeah,
retirement, for
he did.
it being someone who he kind of not married, but it's a bit weird. But
It was
he
his
was the queen at the
daughter-in-law.
time when he went to Yuste. Mary was the queen of Spain.
Yeah, exactly. It just shows how much he did actually care for her. To take that portrait to his private monastery. On his in his final days. You know, was it because he did care for her? Was it regrets of the way he'd messed her around? Um,
And let's
or was it?
remember that Charles and Mary met in person because Charles
Yeah,
visited England, so they
exactly.
knew each other personally.
Yeah,
Yes.
and she always saw him as the father that she always wanted. He was the only one who ever looked out for her. Whether or not he
Well,
meant to is
after
another
she
thing. But
thought he was going to be her husband, because they were
mm,
betrothed from 1521 to
yeah,
1526. So, yes, finally she saw him as a father because she finally married his son.
mm,
because this
Yeah,
is very
it's quite
important. As soon as Mary is queen, Philip is going to be
yeah.
married to someone else, and they're like, no, 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 he's
No,
a
no, no.
queen
You're
in
going
England.
back.
Yeah.
No, it's actually quite symbolic, really, because if you think about it, Mary, the first image we have of Mary, and it's the first miniature in England, is of her for Charles. You know, Charles has a copy of it, or it's meant to be sent to him because she receives a miniature of him. And then on Charles's deathbed, he has Mary still present with him. Isn't
Hmm.
that just that's just a really nice story? I've only just thought about it. Um, so yeah, you know, where does where the Marquess of Northampton's portrait, you know, was it always meant for Spain? Was it not meant? You know,
Right.
it, you know, unless we actually know, we don't know. I mean, the Prado's, well, you know, Charles's copy has an excellent provenance, and I must credit the Prado for this because we know exactly where it was in a
Hmm.
particular year. You know, it's which palace it was, which room it was. You know, it's been in the antechamber. It's been in you know, it's always been an important portrait. Because I can't remember which Spanish king it was, but he had it in his bedroom.
Yeah, and even
You know,
when you see the pictures of the first displays at the Prado Museum when it was founded, Mary's there. So
yeah,
she's always been very recognizable because it is a very iconic portrait that everybody that was copied a lot,
mm,
engraved and disseminated. And not only that portrait, but the medals that Jacopo d'Arezzo did of Mary and Philip, he's using that same model. So do you think that as well as doing this portrait of Mary, Anthonis Mor did miniatures of Mary and Philip. And do you think
mm.
he did also models that other artists could have used, like Jacopo or other people?
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because we have no known, you know, Moore's obviously he's prepared the drawing, he's had sketch drawings, you know, he's had designs. Um, it's interesting that you mentioned Jacopo because if you look at his medals, I can see why lots of people think, oh, it's after Moore, it's after Moore.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some debate whether or not Jacopo actually came before Moore.
Hmm.
So you know, he may have been in the same sitting because it's just the whole facial, you know, the whole what's the word? The way the Queen faces, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's the posture is completely different.
It is.
You know, so I like to think that Jacopo had his own sitting with her, or at least had a joint sitting with Moore. You know, because it makes sense. They're both, you know, they both know each other. They both
Yeah,
know each other quite well. You know, I mean,
exactly.
they may have shared designs. You know, and they were both there at the same time. You
I'm
know,
sure they did.
when they're
I'm sure
printing.
there's a lot more collaboration that
Oh,
we see on the
definitely. You know,
surface. Yeah.
it's one of those things. You know, all the artists knew each other. You know,
Well, speaking
they're all in the area.
Yeah, speaking of those designs, I want you to talk about this is something that you actually we have to give you credit for. The British Museum, they have a little design of a dog that appears
Mm.
in many of these portraits by Anthonis Mor, doesn't he?
Yeah, yes, no, the drawing, well, it's now been re-identified as the
Uh-huh.
unknown lady because this drawing, this drawing used to be called, oh, it's Mary, but it's completely the wrong style. You know, we now
Hmm.
think it's a Flemish lady from the 1560s. So I did actually email well, it was the National Portrait Gallery. I did email them saying, I don't want to be one of these people, but
No,
because
you're a
obviously
specialist.
the original's at the Prado.
Yes. And then
I came across
the
it.
design for the dog is in the British Museum, right?
Yes, yes, it is. So you know, it is interesting how these things sort of they get dispersed. So you know, and we have if we have the design for the dog, maybe somewhere hidden in someone's attic. Could you
In the
imagine? That'd
British
be wonderful.
Museum, what I think is that
Mm,
these artists that arrive to London get access to designs of previous artists. Maybe Anthonis Mor even saw the Holbein Big Book of Designs. Who knows?
mm,
He was all over the place. He saw many designs by many people. I'm sure that there were. If somebody is going to come and work for you, someone like Mary Tudor, who
mm,
inherits a vast collection of artworks from her father, of course
hmm.
you're going to show him pictures and designs and things you have, you know? Who
Oh, of
wouldn't?
course, you know, all the artists must have had a sort of book like Holbein, you know, with their
Yeah.
ideas and sketches. It's just, it's just luck that we have Holbein's still intact, the drawing still intact, you know.
Exactly. For
But it would be a
example,
fascinating discovery.
there's a copy, there's a one of the Clouets copied the Anthonis Mor's portrait of Mary because it is a design of it in the Musée Cluny
Mm,
in France. So this is how we know that these artists not only collaborated but were emulating each other. We know that Rubens copied Holbein's when he was in England, right?
mm,
So I'm sure that Anthonis Mor saw a lot of things, and his trip to England influenced him beyond what is really the real thing is that he influenced Tudor portraiture a ton, didn't he?
oh, definitely, I mean, Moore was very influenced by Holbein, actually.
Exactly.
And his visits to it around Italy and, Europe, he's very much one of these artists who likes inspiration and then he tries to better it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see, the similarities between him and Holbein, really. They are geniuses. Holbein started it off with
Mm-hmm.
his, realistic portraits, and then Moore improved on that with the depth and the shadowing,
And the
and that's
size,
what.
they're a bit bigger, they're more grandiose, and this is just a thing in the fashion too, you know?
Mhm,
Because
exactly.
Antonis Mor is learning from Titian too, because he's one of these artists that travel to different courts, and like we're saying, they are seeing what other artists have done. I mean, these kings
Mm,
and queens who are commissioning these new portraits to Antonis Mor are showing him what they have too. I mean,
mm,
they already have collections going on. Also, I wanted to point out the fact that Mary had painters that she inherited from Edward, right? And I
yeah.
just yeah, and just to make a point about this, when you go to the New Year's gifts in the reign of Mary and Philip, there's a lot of paintings that are given to the Queen. So this means, and
Oh,
when I study Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, I don't see as many paintings in the 1510s, 1520s, and then here now in 1556, 57 on the New Year's, there's at least 10 paintings for
mm,
Mary in the gifts. So I'm
yeah.
thinking, for example, Mrs. Lavina Turnlick gave the Queen a small picture of the Trinity. So Lavina
Oh, I
Turnlick
wonder who
and
that is.
Antony's More met
Yeah.
potentially.
Oh, definitely. You have to, like I said, all the artists sort of lived in the same area of London.
Hmm.
That's where the
Where's that area? Can you explain a little bit for
oh,
someone who,
yes, hang on. Now you're testing me. I believe it was in Southwark. Um, Now my London geography is terrible.
well, imagine my London geography, you know.
imagine. Right, hang on. Let me double check because I
Well,
know where it is.
I
So it's,
put
it's
forth,
by London Bridge.
yes, I've put forth this
Um,
theory that there was a workshop in Baynard's Castle. And
yeah,
that
exactly.
because Baynard's Castle had access to the River Thames, it was very quick to go to Greenwich and places like that, and it was very near the Tower of London. So that's
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. And it makes sense that these people would live both near where the ceremonies are, but both near the river because sometimes these portraits, and they're not only doing portraits, they're doing tons of stuff for decorative work
Mm,
for, they're not just working on portraits.
no.
They have to go up and down the Thames for when they have to go to Greenwich for a feast. Or, for
Yeah.
example, we know that Holbein's big view of Therouanne left from Baynard's Castle in
Mm,
1528 when Sir Henry Guilford was doing those festivities for the arrival of the representatives of Francis the First of France when he wanted to marry Mary, right? That would have been
yeah.
awful, wouldn't it?
God, could you imagine?
No, poor Eleanor of Austria had to do it in the end, but
Oh
Mary could have
no.
been because they sent a miniature of Francis and of his two sons after
Mm,
Charles marries Elizabeth Isabella
yeah.
of Portugal. So this is how important Mary Tudor really is, Princess
Oh, so,
Mary
she
in
was
Europe.
she was the. I don't want to really what's the word? I don't want to discredit her, but sort of she was the prime meat on the market.
She was.
Everyone wanted her. Yeah. So just for the followers, if you didn't know where Suffolk was, it's South London. It's south of the Thames. It's that area.
It's
Um,
amazing. It's an area now where you have lots of bars and restaurants and the London
yeah,
Eye, and you can just.
it's
I was there
it's
not
very
long ago,
soiree
Peter.
now, but back in the day, it wasn't. It was
Yes, yes.
in
We'll
some
we'll
way,
have to do a river tour one day to
yeah.
see where all
Oh,
these
they're
different
great. They're
places
really
were.
great. It's where all the artists were, you know, the people that you didn't really want to see, but you needed them to.
Yes, and that big
But
collection of paintings that Mary inherited from Henry VIII and Edward VI was in
mm,
Whitehall Palace and St. James's Palace, and St. James's
yeah.
Palace is still there. So there's a lot of stuff that is gone, but there's a lot of stuff that's still there, and there's a lot of those paintings are still in the royal collection today.
Oh, I mean, most of them are, because even though we lost a lot during Charles after Charles the First's execution, you know, his son, he demanded that the portraits were sent back, and a lot of people did give it back, especially the foreign buyers, because it's all to do to protect the paintings. So we are lucky that the Royal Collection is the world's most famous collection. And we do have a lot of the surviving portraits. Um,
And a lot of them are very important for the Anglo-Spanish alliance that
mm,
Mary is imagine when Philip II, he was not Philip II yet when he arrives in England and he sees portraits of his grandparents Isabel and
yeah,
Fernando that
yeah.
Mary
Seeing
had,
his
right?
yeah, seeing his great grandparents must have been remarkable. I'm sure he must have seen Mary of Hungary must have told him about the tales of Isabel and Fernando. But actually seeing the portraits there in London, at St. James's, must have been remarkable. And Philip obviously brings his um, tapestries as well.
Yes.
The beautiful works, absolutely beautiful works by
And he
Titian. And
brings so many people with him, and Anthonis Mor arrives, and Jacopo da
mm,
Tresso. I mean, whole the whole propaganda machine that the Spanish monarchy has, really, because he's the heir and he's going
mm.
to succeed soon because his dad is aging, is just coming with him because he is the most eligible bachelor of the time, and he's now married to the most powerful woman in Europe.
Yeah,
So yeah, so let's
it's
talk a bit
great.
more. Like, for example, going back again to the New Year's gifts in 1556, 57. For example, this is a gift to the Queen. Sir Henry Newell, a lute, so an instrument, right? In a
Yep.
case, covered with black silk and gold, because you're a queen, with two little round black tables, the one of the physiognomy of the emperor and the king's majesty, the other of the king of Bohemia and his wife. So
Mm.
the King of Bohemia and his wife are two people that Anthonis Mor painted to
You
that
did.
are also at the Prado Museum, standing there
You
next
know,
to Mary. These ones are standing; they're not sitting.
yeah.
They're standing.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
they're
it's great. It's
sending, so
lovely.
they're gifting her a lute with pictures of these people.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we know that Mary kept loads of miniatures of her family, and the
Mm,
same as Mary of Hungary did, and Mary of Austria before her. They
mhm,
all keep lots of family little portraits. So it's not only just for friendship and family, but it's dynastic alliances. This is who's in favor this week. This is who's these are my family members, so of course I'm going to support them. And there is some sort of love between them. It's not the same love as what we have now, probably, but they do know each other very well through their letters and through the correspondence.
mhm,
That they are the family Mary has because her parents are dead, her
mhm,
brother's dead. She doesn't trust her sister, if it
mhm,
is her sister, according to her. She doesn't. She is alone. She can't trust any of her counselors. The only
mhm,
person she trusts is Renard, and even then, he's just an ambassador, so you can't be too close to him. So the only people she can really trust is Charles, Mary, and then obviously Philip when he arrives.
mhm,
But and Ferdinand, of course. Because she did want well when Philip goes to meet his uncle, Mary does want to go as well, but due to the situation in England, she sadly just has to say, Philip, you go and meet your uncle. But we know there was a gift of it. Gifts were exchanged
mhm.
and portraits were exchanged. So, she is still taking part in this diplomacy, even if she's not physically there. That's what the paintings are for. They're to show, her position, her position and her status.
Exactly. But I think, don't you think, Peter, that this could be once she marries Philip,
Mm.
she she's pregnant a couple
It,
times.
it
So a
is.
pregnant woman is not going to be able to travel. Well,
No,
especially, let's be face it, a pregnant woman the first time at 37 is not going to risk it and go
mm,
anywhere to,
no,
it's too important
exactly.
to stay home and do what she has to do, which is have the baby. Can you
Yeah,
tell us more about that? When
I
Moore
can.
painted Mary, can you tell us more about
Yes,
that?
I can tell you more about more.
This is
So,
probably going to be the title of the episode, More About More.
oh, that'd be great.
We'll ask
So,
Rebecca to do that.
so what a lot of people, I mean, they probably all know now because I keep banging on about it. But remember when I said, the paintings painted between November and December 1554,
We're talking again about Anthonis Mor's portrait of
about the
Mary.
Anthonis Mor
Yeah,
famous portrait,
yeah.
which everyone knows is in the Prado.
Hmm.
So, if ever anyone knows the Tudor history, we know Mary begins to have signs of pregnancy from September. Um,
And
you
why
know,
do you
she has
know this, Peter? Can you tell us the sources, please?
yes. So all of the ambassadors report it. Domestic and foreign. I mean, Renard
Mhm.
talks about it. The French ambassador speaks about it, and the fact that the French ambassador speaking, we know it's true, and Gardner sees it. Everyone knows she's pregnant.
Okay.
Well, she shows the signs of pregnancy. You know, the Queen herself decides to parade her stomach through the court. She has
Hmm.
she lifts. Everyone can see her plain stomach, which that's quite a thing.
And then
You
Mary was
know,
quite thin, right? She was a thin person.
oh, she was a very thing. That
Hmm.
that was what a lot of people were worried about because she was a very thin woman.
Hmm.
Anyway, we come to the Moor portrait. You notice that she's wearing quite a loose gown.
Hmm.
Now, I have to thank Karen Hearn for this because she's the first one who sort of began to
Hmm.
suggest this
It's true,
idea
true.
that we question, oh, why is Mary sitting? Oh, it's because she's a woman. It's just what she does. Well, she doesn't sit in. This is the only portrait that she sits in. All of the others she's standing in, apart from a later 1558 one. But this, so why she's sitting?
Hmm.
Well, my my listeners, that's because she's 3 months pregnant.
Oh,
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
Does
Sorry,
that
did I
flower
say that? Did I?
signify that she's carrying something inside of her womb?
Well, well, it's not just a flower. So, if we look at the jewelry as well, she wears a beautiful diamond and pearl pendant, right?
Hmm.
Everyone always thinks, oh, that's what the betrothal present was from Charles and Philip. Well, no, it's not, because
What? It's not a
no,
peregrina, Peter?
no,
Oh my
no,
goodness,
it's
everybody's going to
not.
be so upset about this. But tell us
I
the
know.
truth. Tell us the truth.
I'm going to get cancelled for this because, and I don't know how no one's noticed this before, but the same jewel is painted by Eweth, and we can date that to the beginning of the year, or at least to the springtime, right? Well, this jewel wasn't given to Mary until the marriage, which is in July. So if this was the Spanish
Tan,
jewel,
tan, tan.
then
Sorry.
how can it possibly be in Eweth's portrait? What we now know, what I argue it's actually the English crown jewels for queens,
Mm.
because the same jewel is described in Henry's infantry as the Queen's jewels. And one of his men goes to the Tower of London and writes, in this chest, which is labeled the Queen's jewels, is a diamond pendant with a large pearl with two antique figures, which
Ooh, what year is this cited in?
this is 47.
Oh, okay. So it
Hmm.
wasn't Philip's gift. Oh
No,
no.
it wasn't. I mean, maybe the top. Well, no, because we know Philip gave her a pearl, and it's not this pearl because this pearl's part of this. I mean, now the diamond, that smaller diamond may have been the one that Charles gave her. You know, we can't prove it, but if it's the same, because it is the same jewel,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's who would have previously worn it. I don't want to say, we don't know, but it's the
Catherine of Aragon,
Queen.
maybe?
Well, maybe. You know, it's just such a shame because we don't have Catherine's records of her
We do
jewels. I mean,
have some of the records of the stuff that Henry took from her.
yes, exactly. So I've been going through those and trying to see if I can match it up. And we do have Catherine's infantry when she dies.
Mm-hmm.
But the jewel's not in that infantry, which is so annoying.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't be because if it's the crown jewels, it would have been taken back to Henry in 1533.
Well, I can tell you that the very few pieces of um, things related to jewels would be goldsmith
Mm,
work that Catherine has in her inventory when she dies in Minette's castle. There's at least two that are, or three that are said to be in the antique work, which is this, right? This kind of
mm,
Renaissance style that
mm.
is just becoming so fashionable in Europe. And Anne Boleyn takes one of those, and Phil
Yeah.
and Henry takes it. So I mean, there's her jewels are taken from her at the
Mm,
request of Anne Boleyn too, and Henry finally. So all the things that she brought from Spain and her dowry became Henry's, really. She could
yeah.
use them while she was queen, but do you think Henry gave her those when he decided to cast her away? No, they were his,
No.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So this could have well been a jewel that she that
Mm,
originally would have been her mother's, right?
exactly.
Because Peter, there's a portrait in the Prado Museum of a woman, an unidentified woman, with a very similar jewel, and she's showcasing it.
Mm, yeah.
So I think we have to like go down this route a bit further, and maybe in a couple of months we could come back and say, "Hey, we know."
Oh,
But the
yeah.
the fact that the jewel is described in Henry VIII's post-mortem inventory, I think, is
Mm,
crucial to realize it
mm,
wasn't a gift. The one
no.
in the Prado wasn't a gift from Philip and Charles. It
Mm,
was probably
exactly.
inherited
No.
as the other jewel that she has,
Mm.
right? Isn't that the other one, the reliquary? Isn't that her
Yes.
father's too?
So the jewel on her girdle is a reliquary, which
Yes.
belonged to Henry V, and it was meant to have. Now, let me get
So
this
it's
right.
also from the crown jewels.
Yes, so it's part of the crown jewels. So it's meant to have a piece of the true cross. It's meant to
Mm-hmm.
have relics of Saint Catherine
Saint Catherine?
and
Really?
Saint Cath. Yes. Now, which Saint Catherine? Was it of Alexandria? Is it with Siena? I mean, they both could work because if we know what these saints are for, one's for
Mm-hmm.
queenship, one's for maidenhood, and
They all
times of
fit.
trouble. They all fit. They all fit. So,
I
but
I love.
sadly, we don't know which reliquary, which
Well,
relics were in them.
another day we can geek out about Saint Catherine of Alexandria because she's one of my favorite saints.
Oh, I bet she is. She's a legend. But yes, so anyway, going back to the portrait and the
Uh-huh.
differences between the Moore one, well, Moore's original, which is sent to Charles,
Mm-hmm.
and the English version, which I like to call them. So the biggest difference, apart from the rose and, bits of the paintwork, the
Mm-hmm.
biggest difference are the rings.
Mm.
Now, in Charles's version, she wears her wedding ring, which
Oh,
is
that makes sense.
a plain gold hoop, right? And she wears her coronation ring, which is the big diamond ring, which she wears first, because obviously she's married
She's married
to the
twice.
country. Exactly. She's married twice, and everyone comments on this. She says
Mm-hmm.
she is married to the kingdom and to her husband. She's
Mm.
married twice. The English versions do not have her wedding ring on.
Mary
Just
was
the
taking
common.
off her wedding ring to
Well,
in front of
this is the
Anthonis
question.
Mor.
This
What a scandal!
this is the question. Is it that the wedding ring wasn't included, or was it only included to please Charles?
Huh?
Because there's two
Or
different,
Philip?
or because Philip would have seen
This
Mary's
is the
version.
one we're sending
Mary's
over.
version, Mary's version doesn't have the wedding ring on.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And for
Only
sure,
Charles
you
has it.
believe that the one in the Prado is the original first one painted, and then the
Well,
yes.
we know this. Well, we know the Prado one is the one that's sent to Charles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, which one was done first? That's was it? Well, you'd think that Mary would have hers done first, wouldn't you?
You don't know.
You don't know, because sadly Moore didn't say, "Oh, today I did Mary, and now I've just made a copy for the king."
What Moore certainly worked with people, along with people. These artists never work alone. So
No.
what about they knew they needed two versions from the get-go?
Well, exactly. They definitely knew they were going to need two because it makes sense, doesn't it? If you're painting one of the Queen, you're going to keep one for herself and then send one to Charles.
Well, and then he had done that in Portugal too, and he had been asked to do that. So maybe this
Mm.
time, since it was later, he was just like, let's do it from the get-go.
Yeah.
Mary had portraits, and especially I want to talk about a portrait in Whitehall
Mm.
that I proposed that could have been by Mitchell Sittow, another famous artist that was all over the place, and Catherine of Aragon's favorite portrait painter.
Mm.
Outstanding, outstanding. Flemish art. Well, he's not Flemish. He's trained in the Flemish style, but he's from the Hanseatic League, so up north in Reval,
Mm.
what today is Riga, I think it is. No,
Mm.
is it Riga?
Ah,
I think
you're
so.
the expert now.
Uh, no, but going back to the portrait in Whitehall, it is described
Mm.
also in that same inventory where you found that jewel that she's wearing in the portrait
Mm.
by Anthonis Mor. And this is a port, and then she had the portrait of Julius II by a copy by
Hmm.
Raphael. So that he's sitting, that's the same model, the same size as the one of by Anthonis Mor of her. But
Hmm.
also there's a description of a portrait, and it said a woman sitting down with a dog in her lap and a red rose in one of her hands, and one of her in her hand, called Mitchell. And that's not a woman's name. My argument was when I published about this is that this probably was autographed, the sign,
Yes.
a signed portrait
By me.
made by
Yeah.
Mitchell Sittow, because in 1505, Catherine is involved in the commission of a portrait of her cousin Juana, the Dowager Queen of Naples, that she's in Valencia, and there's a embassy that is sent to Valencia because she might marry Henry VII of England. And there's a whole
Mm.
report that is sent saying that she has brown eyes and she doesn't have a mustache and her breasts are big and tall and she's not tall, but all these things. And at the end of the actually the report that Henry sends with the ambassadors, there's a request for a portrait to be made. And this is around the same time that Catherine mentions Sita when she sees the portraits of Margaret of Austria that arrive for that same marriage. So Mitchell said that comment that Catherine says could have well been a way to tell Fernando, because this was reported by the Spanish ambassador to Fernando of
Mm.
Aragon, choose Sitao to make this portrait because otherwise they're going to marry uh, Henry to Margaret of Austria, and we want him to marry
Mm.
Juana of Trastámara, Juana, who was in Valencia. So what I'm saying is this could have been also a source. Definitely this portrait in Whitehall that there was a sitting woman with a rose in her hand
Yeah.
must have been. Uh,
There's something going on,
and
isn't
it's
there?
the only portrait that has a given name in
Mm.
the whole inventory. Because when it's a portrait, for example, of the of Queen Isabel of Castile, it says Isabel of Queen of Castile. And this one
Yeah.
is just a woman called Mitchell.
Yeah.
It's probably because this person who did the inventory sees the portrait, sees that there's the word Mitchell's actually
Mm.
written on it, and thinks, oh, that's the woman's name. Because he probably never seen a painting that was signed before.
Mm.
Anthonis Mor, for example, does sign a lot of his paintings, but a lot of artists at this time still don't sign their portraits, right?
No.
Especially not in the
No. Exactly.
in the early 16th century, right?
Hmm.
When Catherine is making this comment.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Moore signs his portraits. Well, he doesn't for Mary. Ewith does. So we're lucky with that. But yeah, I don't. Holbein doesn't. It's because they
Yeah.
don't see it they don't want to take credit for it really. I mean, they're very humble people, really. They don't want to take credit.
Another thing that I wanted to talk about, another source for that portrait of Mary, there were so many sources, must have been the portrait by Titian of Isabella of Portugal that is
Yeah.
now hanging next to Mary at the Prado
Mm.
of Charles's dead wife because
Yeah,
Anthonis Mor would have seen this, right?
seen it exactly. Yes, and I mean everyone. It's always been it's confirmed that it did have it inspired Mary's portrait with more. That's why they've always seen Mary's portrait. Oh, it's just her as a Habsburg queen, as a Habsburg wife.
Hmm.
Sort of forgetting no queen, as in big Q, not small q. You know, because it's only 2 years later she's Queen of Spain,
That's what I'm saying.
and
She's an
yeah,
Isabella of Castile. She's not a queen consort. She's a queen in her own right that also
exactly,
happens to be a queen consort by marriage,
exactly. Mm,
but she's still queen regnant. And I love the way in your work you're always pointing out that she manages to keep the dominant position in a lot of her imagery to prove that because this turmoil in England thinking, oh, Philip and the Spanish are going to take over, but
mm.
she stands her ground, doesn't she?
Oh, she stands her ground completely. The marriage treaty clearly states she is the dominant partner in the imagery, the coins, the medals, whatever. She's always the dominant partner in this.
Hmm.
And even this Moor portrait, she's not seeing herself as the Queen Consort of Spain. This is her as Queen of England, and because she's wearing English jewels, she's not wearing the Spanish jewels at all. This is her independence, but also she wasn't just sort of She was in that weird sort of position, the same as Philip was in England. She was more than a queen consort because she's queen
Hmm.
regnant, and all the ambassadors, Nicholas Wotton, Renard, they all comment saying this is the new Isabel and Fernando. They
Hmm.
are joint monarchs, in both realms,
And
not
they
just
and
in
they
England.
produce images like that, right? There's several images of Philip and
Oh yeah,
Mary looking just like Isabel and Fernando.
yeah, yeah. They're a joint team. They're always together. And it has been speculated. Are there more joint portraits? Was the Moor portrait a joint portrait? I don't know that because I've not seen the back of it. I wouldn't know if it's been cut or if it was its own single thing. But there's loads of, joint images of them together, not facing together. They're facing both the same way. So it's showing their independence.
So
Um,
then, if there would have been, because let's remind people
mm,
that Mary of Hungary sent a portrait of Philip by
hmm
Titian to Mary that was copied because there's one copy in the Royal Collection in England.
yeah.
There's another copy there's a version by Titian's workshop in the Prado too. And
Mm,
she sent that portrait to Mary, and Mary
yeah.
loved it, right?
Oh,
And
she did. She
and
fell in
then
love with
Mary of
it.
Hungary tells her how to look at it, right?
How to look at it exactly. I was just looking at the source this morning actually. She was saying, you have to make sure you look at it in the right light and at a distance. And remember, it was painted 3 years before, so it's not going to be quite accurate. But I do want it back because it's just a dead thing, and you're going to get the real thing soon enough.
Oh, and
Yeah.
then Mary
Then
allegedly
copy,
never returned it.
didn't she?
Or
I
did
thought
she?
she had. Well, I don't know. I assume she had
I
because I
don't
don't
think
think
she
she's
did.
not one of these people who are going to steal things. I mean, like,
I think she
she must
never
have made a
got
copy of
round
it.
to giving it back.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, she's too busy doing everything. That's a
Well,
good
I mean,
excuse,
it
isn't it?
wasn't that long after it's just very sad, but she wasn't around
Mm.
for very long after she got married, is she? So
No,
maybe she never got
always
around to
later.
doing it.
No,
So, I mean, and then
makes you
Mary of
wonder.
Hungary and Mary died the same year. So
Well, they
it's
all did.
yeah.
I mean, it was awful.
Charles
Charles goes first, then Mary, and then Mary.
in a short 3 months, Charles
Three
V,
month window.
Mary of
Yeah,
Hungary, and so Philip loses his father, his closest advisor, and his wife in 3 months.
yeah.
And what
And
do
then you
you
wonder
think
why he.
happens with, do you think that could be the time where that portrait of Mary that was eventually in Isabel II's collection that was given back to
Mhm.
England as a gift?
Well, I mean,
Philip could have taken it?
we don't, we don't know. Who did it belong to originally? Did it belong to Philip? Did it belong to Mary of Hungary?
Hmm.
Or did it belong, or was it an English, but the only reason I wouldn't say it belongs to Mary of Hungary or Philip, because why wouldn't it have the wedding ring?
Exactly. Yes, you're right.
So I've always been drawn saying it's for an English patron. Who it was for, we don't know. We don't know. It's in the Marcus of Northampton's collection now, but was it? always theirs? Did they just send it and then giving it back? We don't know, which is a real shame. But we do know that the one in Boston was Mary's own copy
Right.
because Mary gives it to Henry Jerningham, who's one of her closest supporters, closest advisors, and he was loads of roles. But she sent it. She gives him this painting in 1557.
She does, actually. So she
Yeah,
gets rid of her version of the
she
portrait.
gets rid of her version because she has a new portrait in 1557, 1558 by Ewart, and plus she's also got the earlier one in 53, 54. But sort of going back to the pregnancy thing,
Mm-hmm.
if this is her pregnant, she doesn't want to be reminded of
Mm,
what happened. So, to sort of finish that side of that story, that sad story of is
yeah.
in May, well, in the spring, 1555, she starts complaining about cramps and pains.
So
I mean,
after Anthonis Mor has painted her,
so yep, so Moore paints her November, December 54.
when she's
You know,
pregnant, we've said.
when she's pregnant, she's just crushed a rebellion. She's loving life.
Maybe
Few
she's
months
feeling a
pass.
bit sick about her pregnancy because if
Yeah.
she complains about cramps later, maybe she wasn't having. Some people argue that she looks a bit indisposed or something in this picture or like angry or something. I think
Mm.
she might be a bit weak from being pregnant, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean,
Every
it's
woman
very
knows the first
revealing.
trimester can be messy. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, so in the spring, I mean, Easter time and, a few weeks before the spring, she's showing off the child. It's St. George's Day. The Philip's having jousts with the courtiers, and she's shown everyone the stomach. She's shown everyone,
Hmm.
look how wonderful I am. Anyway, she then goes into confinement in the spring.
And the confinement, just to clarify, is when the queens were going to deliver a baby.
Yes, it's when, close to delivery date,
Hmm.
they get locked away in the
The
palace.
ritual, very
Yeah, it's
typical
it's
of it.
it's a ritual, it's did more harm than good, really. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is that originally she wanted to give birth at Windsor,
Hmm.
but due to time and advice, she ended up going to Hampton Court.
Hmm.
Seems quite a cursed place, really, to be giving birth, doesn't it? Um, so she goes to Hampton Court, and she's still seeing people even in confinement. Bastards are still coming in. She still signs documents. Everyone's still seeing the baby, you know,
The bump.
just the bump. Let's call it the bump. Anyway, rumors then go round saying, "Oh, she's giving birth to a boy. She's giving birth to a boy." Everyone's so happy,
So
bonfire
she went,
celebration.
allegedly, she had her whole pregnancy.
Apparently, she had the baby. It was a boy. She had the cradle already made. It was inscribed, saying how wonderful this child would be, the savior of England. Everyone's so happy about it. Then rumors start spreading. Oh
Hmm.
no, she hasn't really given birth. She's given birth to a monkey. No, there's been a swap. Someone
A
swapped the
monkey?
baby. Yep, they called her a monkey. Um, oh no, wait, no, the baby's been swapped. But
Oh,
then
yikes.
there's rumors going around saying that she's given birth to a mole or a lump of
Oh.
flesh.
Hmm.
Now, lots of people think, oh, that's just saying, that's something awful. You shouldn't be saying that. But if you actually understand, because they didn't call a miscarriage back then.
Hmm.
They called it, a mole. That's the
Hmm.
term used. If
And
you
let's
didn't,
remind everyone they were super superstitious about all of
oh, of
this.
course, definitely.
Catherine Varron has a story about this when she has her first stillborn child,
Mm,
and she doesn't tell her father right away because she wanted to make sure she was going to be fine because it was
yeah,
really bad luck in
it was
England.
awful luck, and that's why Catherine thought she was with twins.
Hmm.
Anyway, these rumors go round. No one's stopping them. But the Queen is suddenly hidden away. No one can see her. Nothing, nothing at all. No one can go in. And she's there for, well, over a month, I think. Just no one's allowed in. So then you start thinking, well, hang on. Put the room, yes, there are rumors, but we believe rumors for lots of things. And all rumors have a bit of truth to them. And to suddenly, if they weren't true, she would surely be showing,
Hmm.
she'd still have people coming in. Or if she's going to fake the baby,
Hmm.
there. someone would have known something. So I, and I still stand by this. She'd, she sadly lost the child.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lump of flesh. It's early stage. Halfway through the pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Near term maybe. You know, and she knows what happens if you don't have a child. If you have a miscarriage, look what happened to her stepmothers.
Mm-hmm.
She knows the risks. So is it more dangerous to say you've lost a child or to
Right.
say, oh no, I wasn't, it was a mistake after all, because she never mentions it. August goes by.
Well, she's just
Right.
giving it's just giving fuel to those people who said the marriage was
Exactly.
doomed, and she chose
Exactly.
exactly, of course.
But
And then let's
and
not
then
forget that Philip and Mary were closely related, so
mhm.
their genetic material was probably
Oh, definitely,
incompatible already. Let's
exactly.
remember what happens in the Spanish monarchy later
Mm,
with the Habsburg line finishes because of this
mm,
problem of
yeah,
just marrying co between cousins. So it could have well been. And this is what I say.
yeah.
I think it's very cruel to say she had phantom pregnancies when there's
Oh, I do. There's
all
no
these
evidence to
accounts
say it
of
was.
her being
What
pregnant. It's just
exactly?
awful.
We believe everyone else had one, so why not her? Um,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
they're closely related. Her age doesn't help.
Uh-huh.
The stress, because it's not, she's having to deal with rebellion. She's having to deal with a council who don't trust, she doesn't trust her council,
She's
can't
always
trust her
had
kinsmen,
problems though, too, with her health,
and
right?
she's always, yeah, exactly. She's never been in the best of health either. And the fact of just having to rule a country on your own, your husband's doing what he can, but he can't do everything because the country won't let him,
Right.
you know, and she wants, she needs this child.
Exactly.
So, it just sadly, it just, she ended up suffering worse because of it. But it is interesting actually because after that event, that's when the burn-ins start.
Hmm.
So, you can see why they start happening because she blames herself. She thinks, right, it's my fault that this has happened. I've done everything right. I've been very lenient to people. I've been merciful. This is now a punishment because I'm not being severe enough. I'm not getting rid of the sickness, which is why the burnings start. And they
Hmm.
are quite severe, but because this is the only thing I can do. What else can I do to have a child? And then sadly, she then suffers. Well, she then thinks she's pregnant in 1557. But we now think it's probably either the cancer or the whatever it was that eventually killed her. But again, we don't.
Could have been
We
complications from the first
exactly,
pregnancy, could have been a second
exactly.
pregnancy. What is true
Placental,
is,
whatever
yeah, when English monarchs die, there are effigies of them carved out, right?
they are exactly. And Mary's is very interesting
Can you tell us
because
why?
yes, I can because Nicholas Lizard, he's a great sculptor, and obviously effigies are always covered up with the gowns they wear and crown jewels and everything.
Hmm.
So not everyone may have noticed this. I'm not, we don't know how the full effigy would have looked. We've just got the wooden
Hmm.
remain, but it's got a bump on it.
It does, doesn't it?
Now, if you're Nicholas Lizard and
On
you're
the lower part of the belly.
of where her
Yeah.
stomach would be, the womb, if you're just a carpenter and you're making this effigy for a dead queen,
Hmm.
why would you make that bump if it wasn't
Exactly.
either physically visible and you need to make it realistic? But even then, why would you do that?
Hmm.
So then you start wondering, well, hang on, were these things sort of prepared beforehand? Did she want people to see this is, I am pregnant?
Hmm.
It's just strange because I mean, other effigy, we don't have that many effigies to compare with, so we can't actually tell, is this just the wood or, but it can't be it's not natural. It's not a natural bump in the wood. It's someone's purposely done that.
Exactly. I think you're very right. So this is such an interesting topic to think about. Whenever we go and see Mary to the Prado Museum, we are seeing a pregnant woman. And I don't think
Mm,
people acknowledge that because she's been such a she's been vilified
mm,
since the day she died, right?
exactly.
So I think that to see Mary in this new light, not only as the
Mm,
mother of England, that is what you claim in your work, because she
mm,
I mean, there's many references to her being the
Oh
mother of
yeah,
England.
I mean she calls herself the Mother of England.
She
She's
does in her speeches, which are amazing.
mm,
So, if anybody wants to look more into all of this, Peter has wonderful work on all of this. Um, and there's a lot of work now being done about Mary too, but there's a lot more that needs to be done, obviously. But just to think that now, whenever we go to the Prado Museum, Peter, we have to go together and
no,
we go
definitely.
and talk to Mary. There's you see her in a different light when you realize this is a woman that is not only in power, but she has a new hope. And I
Yeah,
wanted you to end talking about the fact that she's the only monarch that smiles, right? In her picture.
she is. She's the only Tudor to smile in their portraits.
Why do
She's
you
always
think this
the
is? Does she smile in the Heworths? Does she smile in the other?
no. It's only in Moor's portrait. So
Actually, Peter, I'm gonna say there's one more.
oh, go on.
Peter and I are working together in a, he might kill me for saying this, but working together in a book about Mary's patronage that will come out in the series Queenship and Power by Palgrave Macmillan later this year or early next year. And Peter sent me some very interesting images, and at least is one of the miniature images of Mary. It probably could be by Lavina Turnlick, where she's also
Ah, that one.
smiling.
Oh, what the yes, the legal roles. Yes.
So
Yeah, she is
Mary
in
liked to
the
smile in her
Oh, she
pictures.
did. I mean, she was a fun time girl. She loved gambling.
She
She loved
doesn't tell us
bowling.
more about that because she doesn't come
Oh,
across as
definitely.
that.
Oh, she's honestly she's such a laugh. There's one story where she's bet her breakfast on winning a game. I think it's bowls. It might be bowls or some game, and she loses. So now she has to. Her breakfast is then given to someone else. I mean, I'm sure
Oh, she
got
bet
another
her
person.
breakfast.
She bet her breakfast, so it's obviously quite a good breakfast. She loses so much money on cards and gambling because she loves it, but she's not very good at it.
Oh, but
Um,
she was what was but she was very good at music, wasn't she?
yes, I mean, she was a great musician. She played loads of instruments. I
She
think
played
she
for the
could
French
sing.
ambassador.
She
She,
did. Well, she was only what 5 years old, 4 years
yeah.
old when she played for them.
Well,
She
I
loved to
argue
dance.
in my new forthcoming chapter that Susanna Horenboot taught her to paint. So all these
Mm,
ideas of oh, when Mary, when I don't know why people haven't made this connection, but when Mary dies, Philip goes back to Spain and marries Elizabeth of Valois and recruits Sophonis Manguisola to be his wife's companion and to teach her how to paint. And
mm,
Sofonisba renders some of the most amazing portraits that we have today in the Prado Museum of the Royal Family. The most famous portrait of Philip II of Spain is by Sofonisba Manguisola, the Italian
mm,
artist. Well, Philip had seen Mary and Lavina together in England,
mm.
right? So this was most
Yeah,
likely the
they were close
reason why he
together.
thought this is a great idea. Instead of having Anthonis Mor, he's great, but he can't be alone with my wife because
Mm,
I
exactly. Have a fit. You need because that's another thing. More, and they would not have been alone with the Mary.
exactly,
You
exactly.
needed a woman there. So,
Yes.
it may have been turning because she could have, helped with the artistic style and say, oh, no, this would look good, this would look good. I
Wow,
mean,
imagine
it makes you
that.
wonder, doesn't it? Could you
We
imagine?
should finish with that, Peter, because I just the thought of Mary, Lavina Turnlick, and more. Where did you think that portrait was painted? Let's finish with that. Where
The more one.
there's a
Well,
column. That's a
there
reference to
is.
Charles V, but is it an
Mhm.
actual column in a palace in England? What do you
Well,
think?
this has been, I was trying to work it out. Where, where is it? Sadly, I've not been allowed into St. James's Palace yet, so I can't tell you if it's there. Um, it maybe Greenwich, Whitehall. I'm trying to think what was her favorite place. Um,
She died in St. James's Palace.
she did die.
The
She died in
portrait of
St.
Julius
James's.
II was in St. James's Palace.
Mm.
And the
And
chair,
that's where the court of St. James is. So,
and in the inventory of Henry VIII, the chair with the
mm,
Spanish decoration
St. James's.
um, it was in St. James's too.
Mm.
So
So it may well have been St. James's. You know,
yeah. Yeah, we'll have to go there together too. So we've got a trip planned to go to St. James's Palace and the Prado Museum to find
Mm.
out about all these things about Anthonis Mor and Mary the First. Well, Peter, I think we're going to have to come back and talk more about Mary's artistic patronage and Anthonis Mor and Holbein because I felt like it
Oh,
was a
definitely.
short.
Yeah, definitely. Get Europe in there as well because Moore and Europe, they knew each other. I don't know if they were friends or not, but they certainly knew of each other.
Okay, so
So,
Peter has some homework to do. He needs to find out if Hewitt and Moore ever got along or had a fight like
mm.
Michelangelo and
Oh, that'd be funny,
Toriano, and
wouldn't it?
because you said Anthonis Mor wasn't the nicest guy, right?
Yeah, well,
So
I mean, we don't, maybe it's just his enemies going back on him, but apparently he had a bit of a temper, but then all lasted stew.
who
But I
doesn't?
mean, the fact that his children didn't want anything to do with him,
Yes.
it sort of makes you
Yeah,
wonder, doesn't
he's
it?
got a bit of a temper, like other artists, like art historians sometimes. Some people just
Mm.
have a bad temper, It's okay. We gotta love him because he did leave us the most amazing portraits. So, Dr. Peter, thank you very much for coming today to the show. I'm sure listeners will be delighted. And I just want to say, hey, come back and let's talk more about art history. I think this part of art history in the Tudor court is just such a wonderful topic that, let's come back and talk about Youth and Anthonis Mor's potential fight maybe soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a great
Okay.
pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tutorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.